Hi, everybody. I'm Arthur Laffer. I'm here for Pinnacle Bank. And I just want to tell you, I love Pinnacle Bank. I deposit there. I own stock in it. I was one of the founding investors when they had the first IPO. So I just love the bank. By the way, I'm also head of the bank's Economic Policy Advisory Board. I just want to make sure you all understand I am. I'm the only member of that board. But still, it's fun. Thank you for being here today. I've got to start off with a little story. I'm from Tennessee. I moved here from California to Tennessee in 2006. The best move I've ever made in my life. It was wonderful. I love Tennessee. Not that I don't love California. I just don't like their taxes. But I was in the convention center here in Nashville, and I heard these people talking, a little group of people talking, and the one guy was telling the other guy, "Did you hear about the Tennessee family that packed up all their belongings? They packed up everything. The whole family did, all of them together, and they moved to Illinois. Did you hear that story?" And the other guy said, "Well, no, I didn't." And the first one looked back at him and said, "You never will, period." So this is a great state, great bank, and thank you for letting me be here today. I want to talk to you about the economy. I want to talk to you how things are going along, and I hope some of you have been with me before, because I'm going to sort of continue on. But the pandemic looks like it's dying down quite nicely here in the U.S. Obviously, there's some pockets that are still showing increases in cases, but we've got the vaccine has taken place. A lot of the elderly people are fully vaccinated, like moi, and the death rates are dropping quite substantially. The caseloads, to the extent they are increasing with young people who are much less at risk. And the process of handling this is one of the most amazing miracles of human history. I mean, when President Trump did the warp speed to get this happen, people were saying it would take 5, 4, 3, 6, 7 years to be able to get the vaccines done, tested, all of that. With warp speed, we were able to get vaccines onto the market within a year. I mean, it is incredible what happened there. Now, you don't underestimate the companies that did it, and the scientists there, the virologists and all these others. They were amazing, but also the government was amazing for clearing out all the impediments to do that. And what you have witnessed in this last year, 2020 March on, is one of the biggest miracles that has ever happened. We still have a lot of effect of the pandemic and the lockdown and all that's occurred. And as the states individually are removing the lockdowns, you're seeing the economy bounce back. What I want to tell you when you look at these numbers on GDP and growth in the economy, don't confuse high growth rates with returning to normal. All of these growth rates that you're seeing, whether it be the fourth quarter of last year, the first quarter of this year, or the one that's just going to come out very soon, which will be the second quarter of 2021, all of those high growth rates are really just bringing the U.S. economy back to where it should have been. These are not long-term growth numbers. They just plain aren't. So don't overestimate the benefits that come from these growth rates. It's nice that we're coming back to where we should have been quickly, but these are not long-term growth rates. They are not the metrics that you should judge government by. It's just a removal of the lockdown, and that's what's happening. And what you've seen going on here with all the programs, and it started with Trump's $3.5 trillion spending program. It then was another $1 trillion at the end of Trump. Now you have the Biden ones, which I don't know how big they are. They're just huge numbers. They're what Bill Sapphire used to refer to as MAGO numbers. He spelled it MEGO, which he claims stood for My Eyes Glaze Over. These programs, I think, are mistakes. I don't think that they are really necessary to get us back up running. In fact, a lot of them will work and inure very much to the detriment of the economy over the long term. But they're here, they're done, they're built into the cake. They are not very good. One of the things that the PPP program did was it gave companies a lot of money, loans at first, and then forgiveness of those loans. It gave them loans to make sure that they didn't go under. Well, they gave it to companies that should have gone under, and they gave it to companies that had liquidity problems that shouldn't have gone under. There was no discrimination. And with those PPP funds, it's just transferring government debt right to the balance sheets of companies without going through their income statements. It's just prodding up. And a lot of companies that are not good, they're not efficient, they're not really basically solvent in their business things, have been subsidized, which will not work well for the long term of the companies. but it does stimulate the stock market. It does make it look like we're in a bull market, which we are, but because of the PPP loans and other spending. Now, some of the stimulus spending went through sort of a spending digestive track, I like to say. You give it to someone $1,500, they spend it over the next 2 months, then it lands on the balance sheet of the company. But it does go through the income statement. Those do go through the income statements. So when you see these companies with higher earnings, it is to a large extent because of the stimulus spending, and that too is not a long-term solution to the economy. It's popped us right back. Now, just so you know, whenever you redistribute income, which is what all of these programs are, you reduce total income. I'd like to go through it with you quickly, slowly, but when you redistribute income, you take it from someone who has a little bit more and you give to someone who has a little bit less. By taking from someone who has a little bit more, you reduce that person's incentives to produce, and that person will produce a little bit less. By giving to someone who has a little bit less, you provide that person with an alternative source of income, and that person too will produce a little bit less. The theorem here is very simple, but oh so important. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. And the more you redistribute, the greater will be the reduction in income. We have put in so much redistribution that is going to affect the growth of the U.S. economy for decades to come, and it really will. So that's what's happening with the stock market and growth in these redistribute. I want to talk to you about the one that's in play right now, which is the president's tax bill. And I want to start off because I'm going to caricature what his proposal is, not give you the exact details, although I will give you some of the exact details. I want to caricature what President Biden is doing, basically, is reversing President Trump's 2017 tax cuts. That's what it's doing, period, pure and simple. So let me go through what happened with President Trump's 2017 tax cuts. And I want to put on your screen right now what Trump's tax bills did and what Biden plans to do about those. For example, Trump cut the corporate income tax rates from 35% to 21%. We were the highest in the world at 35%. 21% put us in the middle of the pack. Biden wants to raise that rate back up to 28%, which would once again put us at the highest in the world. Trump imposed a 10.5% minimum tax on foreign earned and foreign held profits. Biden wants to double that to 21%. President Trump cut the personal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37, put through some pass-through tax rates that are much lower. Biden, I believe, wants to reverse those. I think he wants to raise the corporate tax personal income tax back up to 39.6, and then with the Medicare add-on, it would be probably something like 43%. Biden also wants to raise the capital gains tax rate to something like 43%. He wants to get rid of some of the special there. I do believe Biden wants to keep the $10,000 limit on the salt tax, state and local salt taxes. I think he does want to keep that. I don't think he wants to raise that. Trump, of course, removed the penalty for not buying into ACA, into the Affordable Care Act, what's called the individual mandate. I'm not sure what Biden's going to do on that. And the full expensing of capital expenditures for 5 years, which Trump put into the corporate thing, I'm not sure what Biden's going to do. But my guess is he probably is going to try to reverse that too. Now, his reversal is not 100%, but what I want to do here, so you can get a good flavor of what's going to happen, is I want to go through what happened when Trump's tax bill took effect. Now, let me go through the first slide here if I can. The top of the first slide is real GDP growth. And if you can look at that top slide, U.S. real GDP growth in the 4 years preceding Trump's tax cut. U.S. and OECD, European growth, were almost identical. As you can see on that chart there, you can see when the tax bills came in, you can see when the situation, you can see when Trump took office, you can see when the tax bill, the dark line is when the tax bill took effect. We were growing almost exactly at the OECD line. Quarter by quarter, we were marching in lockstep with Europe. Once the tax bill took effect, then you can see what happened. European growth rates declined very sharply. But the U.S. was no longer in lockstep with Europe. Our growth rates were much, much higher. U.S. growth rate was higher, in my view, because of the tax bill. And that gap got very, very large in the growth rates and has continued, by the way. So I believe that the tax bill caused U.S. much higher growth rates. Now, if you go to the bottom of the page, I can translate those growth differentials into what happened to GDP. As you can see, prior to Trump's tax cut, the two GDPs moved right together. Boom, boom, boom. Once the tax bill took effect, the two GDPs diverged. And by the end of the time, by the end of 2 years, U.S. real GDP was 2.5% higher than it would have been had it grown at the European rate. My statement to you today is U.S. real GDP was about $500 billion higher than it otherwise would have been because of the tax cuts. Pure and simple. The tax bill really did affect the economy in a very, very positive way. Now let me go to the next page with you to take you a look at what happened to the tax bills by poverty rates on the left and by individual unemployment rates on the right. Now, poverty rates have been dropping Trump coming into office, but they continued to drop after he was in office. And by the time we got to the last 2019, the end of 2019, U.S. poverty rates were the lowest they have ever been in recorded history, period. That's an enormous accomplishment. I attribute a great deal of that to the tax bill that Trump put through in 2017. If you look at real median income, the same thing is true. Now, real median income was going up under Obama. That's very true. It was going up. But with Trump taking office, that real median income growth continued quite substantially and grew and I attribute a lot of that to President Trump's tax bill. If you look at the increase in the median income over the whole Trump period, it was up $6,500 on a base of about $62,000. Throughout the whole 8 years of Obama, the total increase in median income was a little over $1,000. These are the numbers, the official numbers. If you look at the U.S. unemployment rate again, under Obama, it was falling quite nicely, and it continued to fall under Trump. And I think a lot of that has to do with Trump's tax bill. Now, let me go to some of the ones that are politically highly sensitive. The next column I want to just show you here is black unemployment rate continued to fall under President Trump to where it hit the lowest in recorded history. I mean, literally the lowest level. You can see that on the top. The second one, Hispanic or Latino unemployment rate, again, hit the lowest record ever under Trump because there. If you look at people, the unemployment rate of people who have less than a high school diploma, the unemployment rate. These are really the people really disadvantaged by having a very low education level. Again, you hit the lowest unemployment rate for those people as well. Pretty wonderful accomplishments for the tax bill. Let me then take you to the next page, if I can, where I look at revenues. And the top one in that next page are revenues. I look on the left-hand side, those three, the black, red, and blue lines there are total federal government tax revenues. The black one is 4 years ago to 2 years ago. The black one is 4 years before the tax cut took effect to 2 years before the tax cut took effect. That's the total tax revenues of the federal government. The red one is total tax revenues for the 2 years preceding the tax bill. And the blue one are total federal tax revenues in the 2 years following the tax cut. As you can see, the tax cut not only led to a stronger economy and lower unemployment rates, but it also led to higher tax revenues. These are the official numbers from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Congressional Budget Office. These are the official tax numbers, national income and product accounts basis, the way you're supposed to do the numbers. Not only did tax revenues increase, but they increased at a faster rate following the tax bill than they did before the tax bill. You know, the tax bill paid for itself. If you look at for total federal government, federal, state, and local tax revenues, which is the right-hand side, you can see the same results, only now including state and local tax revenues as well. This tax bill paid for itself, pure and simple. If you look at the chart below that, you can see that the U.S. experience is not unusual. Here we have from 1981 until the present. The blue line is the OECD equal weighted average corporate tax rate. That's the average tax rate of all the OECD countries, I think 32 countries, something like that. That's the average tax rate. And the red line, our total tax revenues as a share of GDP for the OECD, those same countries. And hello, hello, hello. The tax rates, as the tax rates went down for the OECD, what happened to revenues? Revenues as a share of GDP rose. Duh. I mean, that is exactly what happened with the OECD, and it's what happened with the U.S. and the tax bill. Let me go to the next page with you if I can. And this is one that's really, really very important, and I just want to go through these numbers with you. We had a big tax cut under Reagan. When I was with President Reagan, you know, my favorite president of all time. I mean, he's just a wonderful, wonderful man and all sorts of things. We took the U.S. tax rate in 1986 down to from I think it was almost 50% down to 39% during that time. As you know, that was the Reagan wonderful period of prosperity. We dropped it. By the time we came to 2016 under President Trump, the tax rate was exactly the same as it had been in 1988, but now it was the highest tax rate in the world. And why? Every other country in the world cut their tax rates during that period, and we ended up being the highest in the world, even though the rate was the same. Under President Trump, we cut that tax rate down to put U.S. 14th amongst the countries there. Under Trump, he dropped it to almost 26%. That's federal, state, and local combined. And now, if Biden has his way, the tax rate will be popped back up to where it will be the highest in the world. Let me just tell you that if you play the film backwards, if you reverse Trump's tax cuts, you will reverse the consequences, and it will be very unpleasant for the U.S. economy. Enough. I'll take these off the screen. If any of you want them, you can just get your Pinnacle representative, and they'll make sure they get that chart for you. But that's what I'm worried about here, is if these bills come in. Now, do I think they'll pass? I think something will pass. But I don't think it will be exactly as President Biden has proposed. I think it will be modified substantially, but it will be in the wrong direction. And that's all I'm going to talk about this administration. I don't think they're going to get rid of the filibuster. I think there's going to be a lot of modulation and moderation in the bills, but they are moving in the wrong direction. If you look at the states of the United States, I think you're seeing major improvements in some of the states. I just had dinner night before last with Ron DeSantis of Florida down in Palm Beach. I've been seeing a great deal of him lately. A phenomenal governor. The results in Florida are amazing. If you look at Texas, I think the results are amazing. You look at Illinois, as I told you about that. I mean, Tennessee, as I told you about that Illinois family. Tennessee is doing really well as well. If you look at the states that are having problems, they're California, they're Illinois, they're New Jersey, they're Connecticut, they're New York. I could go on and on. But the states today are clearly showing the power of economics, and I think that will continue to be the case. I think the fast-growing states will continue to grow, and I think those that are high-tax states will continue to shrink relative to the rest of the world. When I look at the elections coming on, as I mentioned, I do not think that the Senate will get rid of the filibuster. I don't think that will happen. When I look at the elections, I think it will be very hard in 2022 for the Republicans to take the Senate back. I think it will be very hard because the math is very much against them. There are more Republican senators up for re-election than Democratic senators, although it's possible. I think the Republicans will pick up the House. I think they'll pick it up substantially. I think that will change the dynamics of Washington politics. There's a very large debt outstanding happening, which is a crime. I mean, we've become Japan with all this debt, which will lead to a lot slower growth, by the way. But we will survive. I think the politics will be such that these days, this sort of the Biden agenda, the Democratic agenda in there, will be considered one of the worst sets of policies we've had in years. But we will survive. And so far, I think this administration and what's happened in the economy has been a very big lesson learned, I hope politically, because, bottom line, people deserve the governments they get. And, there's nothing like a low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money. What's going to happen to inflation, I can't tell you for sure, but I think there is a reasonable chance that inflation will be picking up as well. That's another bad consequence. Regulatory restraint, which this administration is not doing, I think is also, but I think you'll find the next administration reversing a lot of that. What I want to make sure you understand is that over the last, let's say from 1945 to the present, we have had huge progress in the economy. In 1945, the highest marginal income tax rate federal was 94%. Today it's 37%. That's amazing. When John F. Kennedy took office in 1961, the highest corporate tax rate was 52%. Today, that highest corporate tax rate is 21%. That's an amazing problem. I mean, deregulation. In 1976, every state in the nation, with the exception of Nevada, had a state estate tax. Now, very few states have their own separate estate or death tax, as some people call it. The inventory taxes at a state level have been removed. Right to work has perpetrated almost all the states in the United States. Far more than half the states have right to work laws instead of forced union laws. These are all very strong economic benefits. And I could go on and on. The decontrol of airlines has led to huge improvements in airline services and much more affordable travel. Decontrol of trucking, decontrol of ophthalmology, of cosmetic surgery, of all of these, allowing discount houses. You know, it used to be illegal to discount products. Now we have Walmart, we have Costco, we have Lowe's, we have all of these, Home Depot, all of these companies that discount, really huge benefits for the consumers. So when you sit here and say, we are going to have a little setback period now, but this setback period is not going to last forever. It's not going to kill the country. And then when that period's over, what you're going to see is the response on politics, which is being played out in the states right now. And I think you're going to see the U.S. come back. We have a couple of years to wait. We aren't going to do that reversal immediately, but I am quite optimistic about the long run of the U.S. We're just in one of those pullback periods, and with that, I'll stop here and just throw it open for questions.
Well, Dr. Laffer, thanks for your time and your insight. We do have several questions that have come in. One point that I would make before we jump into questions is this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com/watchpnfp, this event will be there along with several other webinars that we think you'll find helpful. And also your financial advisor has access to the paper that Dr. Laffer has referenced today. So we know that some of the slides may have been a little fuzzy or grainy, but we'll make it available to you and we'll put it to you in an email. Dr. Laffer, our first question comes from Trey, and he's a contractor, and obviously his concern is in the rising costs in his materials. Yeah. He's currently not even able to quote a price to customers because of the rapid change in their pricing. His concern is, what's your perspective with inflation, especially with rates and where the cost of these goods are?
Yeah, let me apologize, Trey, if I can. I'm an economist. I'm not a business person. I'm not a construction person. So I have a certain set of indicators of metrics I use, which are not complete. They're as complete as I can have as an economist. And when I look at inflation, I look at the 10-year bond yield. I compare that 10-year bond yield with the 10-year TIPS yield and see what type of inflation the market is forecasting. And when I look at that number, I don't see inflation being a big play. I mean, there's been some slight rise in interest rates, but not a lot. I look at gold prices. When you look at gold prices in a long-term spread, you know, they just don't tell you that inflation is coming back right now. So from my macro standpoint, I don't see the indicators indicating an increasing rate of inflation. Now, I'm also on some private equity boards as well. Every single company I talk to has the same story that you're telling me. Their supply costs are rising sharply, their expenses are. Now, there are other companies that I know of that are not talking about this, and these are disruption companies that have had huge improvements in technology, and what's happening is the price of those products are falling very, very sharply. Communications costs, medical costs, all of these other things have shown it. My best guess is I think there's a very reasonable risk that inflation will be coming back, not like the late 70s. And by the way, you shouldn't have said the 80s. We were the ones who got the inflation down, not pushed it up, but just joking. But I think if I were to give a bet, I'm more pessimistic about inflation today than I was, let's say, 2 years ago, year and a half ago. because of all the supply prices and everything coming in. But there are counterbalancing forces. So as a risk-averse person, I'm doing a lot of things to protect myself. I bought gold and put it in my portfolio, not a large amount, but I put it as a safeguard. I've done the shorting of the 10-year bond yield, of the long-term bond yield with a TBT. So I've done that in my own portfolio, just trying to protect my portfolio from the prospects of rising inflation. And I hope that answers your question. I don't know whether inflation's coming back for sure or not, but I think the chances of it coming back are much higher today than they were, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Thanks for that. Don has a question about tariffs. Would you offer your perspective and outlook on tariffs?
Yeah, I'm afraid that tariffs are here to stay, and I don't see Biden reducing tariffs. I am a different type of person than most people. I don't view China as my enemy, and I don't think tariffs are good for the U.S. I really don't. Now, we can use tariffs for political reasons. That's been done from time immemorial. That always has been done. But for protection purposes, I think tariffs are a huge mistake. We make some things better than foreigners, and foreigners make some things better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those things we make better than they do in exchange for those things they make better than we do. Tariffs really drive a wedge between the gains from trade, both in consumption and on production. I sometimes describe it this way: it's, without China, there is no Walmart. And without Walmart, there is no middle class or lower class prosperity. I mean, we need China as a trading partner. We really do. We and China are beautifully matched for great gains from trade. Now, I know they do all things wrong, and we should do all we can to stop that, but let's not throw all the good stuff out. If you look at China as a threat and how we can respond to China as a threat, I just beg you to step back for a second and take a little breath. From 1970 to the present, to the end of 2020, China increased its real GDP 33-fold. That's an average annual compound growth rate of about 7.7%. U.S. during this same period increased its real GDP by less than threefold. China is growing like that. The U.S. is growing like that. It's amazing. If you extend this period out another 10, 15, 20 years, I would much rather do something to bring China back into the fold than I would like to be aggressively hostile to China. And I know their military position is untenable. I know some of their business practices are untenable. But the more we antagonize and hostilize China, I think the more likely it is that we'll lose a lot of the economic benefits. I mean, China owns $1.3 trillion of our national debt. They have basically paid us interest because the inflation rate's higher than their interest rate. They have basically lent us this money and paid us interest to lend us the money. I mean, I don't know where you get something better than that. But all I want to say is be very careful about what happens here. I think trade's important, and I'd love to see us reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers substantially, especially with our fine trading partners and also with any type of industry where we can get the competitive gains from trade.
Tim has a question about some of Trump's tax cuts and the benefits potentially only being one side of the story. What about the deficits that it was creating, and what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, let me just say that you got to go back and look at the chart I just told you. It did not create deficits. Tax revenues after the tax cuts went up. It's called the Laffer curve. And this is a perfect example. We lowered those tax rates. We became more competitive. There were less inversions of companies leaving and going to Ireland. Companies expanded their output and production employment. We got more employment tax. We got more income tax. We got more all the and the tax cuts more than paid for themselves. If we raise those tax rates back up, we'll lose money on that, period. So I would say, please, please, please look at what actually happened. And what actually happened is the tax cuts led to more tax revenues, not less. And I think it means we're reducing the deficit by lowering the tax rates, not increasing the deficit. Now, the big deficit problems are the spending. I mean, the stimulus spending. I mean, that's just huge amount. It dominates everything we have. But the tax cuts are not a deficit creator, period. We cut tax rates, which increase tax revenues. Look at those charts. Those are the actual numbers from the government, period.
I think we've got time for one more question. Ashley asked the question about GDP still being the one. She's
Yes,
questioning
I
whether
remember.
or not if it's a good measure if the country is doing well.
Yeah, GDP is the one. Yes, you're right. Does GDP have all sorts of problems with it? Of course it does. But GDP is the one central. It is the total production within the territorial confines of the U.S. In a period of time, if it's a year or a quarter. It is the right measure to look at, but don't misinterpret it. GDP, what you need to do is look at GDP on a gross scale, all right? What it was in, let's say, February of 2020. And then when the pandemic hit, you take that trend line and go there and look at what happened to real GDP going down and then popping back. What we are doing in GDP now is coming back to where we would have been. These GDP growth rates are not comparable to growth rates when there wasn't a pandemic. They're just not. We're coming back to where we should have been. Once we get back to where we should have been, then those growth rates in real GDP will become very important and very relevant and extremely useful. But until that time, don't get yourself enamored by these very, very high growth rates they report. We're still below where we should have been had we not had the pandemic. Once we get there, then we start looking at growth rates again.
Well, Dr. Laffer, we're appreciative of your time for being with us today. It's always a treat to have you come in and spend time with us. We do have Dr. Laffer scheduled for July 14th, so you'll be back with us again through another virtual forum, so we're thankful for that. Again, as a reminder, this event will be available to you on YouTube, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/watchpnfp. You can find it there likely within the next 24 hours. We'll have it up and available along with many other events and videos that hopefully you'll find helpful. We're thankful that you've engaged with us this way through a virtual forum. Our typical approach to this is we like to have friends together in person so you can network, you can meet people, and you can spend time with our people. Soon enough, we'll be able to do that again, but we're thankful that you engaged with us in the virtual forum. And Dr. Laffer, we're thankful for your time. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.